All right, deep divers, get ready to dive into some seriously deep waters today. We're tackling Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in his Discourse on Metaphysics, and let me tell you, this stuff is not for the faint of heart.
It's true. Leibniz really goes for the big questions, doesn't he? I mean, he's
Yeah.
not afraid to tackle the really fundamental stuff about existence, God, the universe, you name it.
Right, and our listeners are right there with him, wanting to unpack all of it. So where do we even begin with someone like Leibniz?
Well, I think a good place to start is with his idea of God. Leibniz was a devout believer, and his whole philosophy really hinges on this concept of God as this, well, almost this super being, right?
Okay, a super being. I like where this is going.
Well,
Give us the Leibnizian God in a nutshell.
So for Leibniz, God is the ultimate source of all things. He's got infinite knowledge, infinite power, basically every perfection you can imagine, he's got it in spades.
So God's the ultimate overachiever, top of the class, head of the board, the whole shebang.
That's one way to put it. But you see, this idea of God as the ultimate perfection, it leads to some pretty interesting and maybe even some tricky
Oh,
questions.
I'm sure. Like, if God is so perfect, why does the world often feel, well, kind of not perfect? I mean, let's be real. Things can get pretty messy down here in the human
Yeah,
realm.
exactly. That's the classic problem of evil, right? How can a perfect God create a world where bad things happen?
Yeah, it's kind of a head scratcher when you really think about it. So, how does Leibniz deal with that whole, if God is so good, why is there so much bad question?
Well, Leibniz was a pretty clever guy, and he came up with this fascinating argument. He said that God, being perfect, couldn't have created a world any better than this one.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying there's absolutely and no room for improvement, not even like a few tweaks here and there.
Not according to Leibniz. He uses this analogy of a painting, right? Imagine a masterpiece, like something by Michelangelo. Would you ever walk up to it and say, you know what, this would be better if you just added a few more clouds over there?
Okay, bad example because I totally would, but I get your point. You're saying it would be insulting to the artist, right? Like you're implying they didn't know what they were doing.
Exactly. And for Leibniz, saying God could have made a better world is like telling Michelangelo he missed a spot on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It diminishes God's perfection, you see.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where he's coming from. But doesn't this lead us into another head scratcher? If this is already the best possible world, what does that say about our free will? Are we just puppets on a string dancing to God's tune?
Ah, yes, free will. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Leibniz has a very particular way of looking at it. He calls it predetermined harmony.
Predetermined harmony. Okay, I'm already intrigued, but a little terrified. Break it down for me.
Well, imagine for a moment that your life is like a movie reel, right? Every moment, every choice, every triumph, every heartbreak, it's all there on that film.
Okay, I'm following so far. My life,
Ooh.
the movie. But where does the predetermined part come in?
Well, according to Leibniz, God already knows every single frame of that movie. He sees the beginning, the middle, the end, all at the same time.
So he's like the ultimate movie critic, but he's seen the entire film before it's even started. And we're just acting out our parts.
That's one way to think about it. But this is where it gets really interesting. You see, just because God knows what's going to happen doesn't mean we don't have free will.
Hold on, now I'm really lost. How can we be both free and predetermined at the same time?
Well, Leibniz makes this distinction between necessary truths and contingent truths. Necessary truths, those are things that are absolutely positively true no matter what. Think of mathematical laws, like 2 plus 2 will always equal 4.
Okay, 2 plus 2 equals 4. I'm with you so far.
But then there are contingent truths. These are things that are true, but they could have been different. They depend on God's choices and even our own choices within this grand, predetermined plan.
So is my deep and abiding love for triple chocolate cake a necessary truth or a contingent truth?
Well, I suppose that would depend on whether or not you could have chosen to love carrot cake instead. And that's where we get into the weeds of free will and God's foreknowledge.
Okay, my brain is officially starting to melt a little bit. We're talking about God knowing the future, free will, and triple chocolate cake all in one go. This is why we love Leibniz.
Exactly. He makes you think. But before we lose ourselves completely in the philosophical weeds, I think it's time to talk about those bouncing bodies I mentioned earlier.
Bouncing bodies. Okay, now you're really speaking my language. Leibniz, always full of surprises. Tell me everything.
Well, Leibniz wasn't just a philosopher, he was a bit of a science geek too. And he had some pretty strong opinions about motion and what makes things happen in the physical world.
I'm all ears. Lay some physics on me.
All right, so picture this. You've got two objects. One is heavy, like a bowling ball, and the other one is light, like, say, a tennis ball. And you drop them both from the same height. What do you think happens?
Well, assuming we're not talking about a feather in a bowling ball here, they should both hit the ground at roughly the same time, right?
That's what Galileo proved, right? But Leibniz was thinking about things a bit differently. He was interested in the force of the impact.
Okay, so even though they hit the ground at the same time, the bowling ball is going to pack a much bigger punch, right?
Exactly. And that got him thinking about how force and motion are related. You see, back then, the dominant theory was that force and motion were directly proportional. Basically, the harder you push something, the faster it moves.
Well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Push harder, move faster. It's pretty intuitive.
Right. But Leibniz wasn't convinced. He thought there was more to the story. And his observations about those falling objects, they played a key role in challenging that idea.
So just by thinking about bowling balls and tennis balls, he was shaking up the world of physics. I love this guy. But how does this all connect to his ideas about God and the universe?
Well, for Leibniz, it all goes back to this idea of underlying forces that shape reality. He thought that to truly understand the universe, you couldn't just look at the material world, the stuff you could see and touch.
Yeah, to go deeper, right? Like there had to be something else going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And this is where he brings back those forms we talked about earlier, those immaterial essences that give shape and purpose to everything in the universe.
So it's not just about the objects themselves, but about the forces, visible and invisible, that are acting on them, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding the web of relationships, the connections between things, the underlying harmony that governs the cosmos. And this is where we start to see how Leibniz's ideas about physics, about motion and force, they start to bleed into his ideas about the soul.
Okay, I am so ready to talk about souls. Give me all the Leibnizian soul goodness.
Well, buckle up, because this is where things get really mind-bending. You see, for Leibniz, each individual soul, each mind, it's not just a passive receiver of information, it's a dynamic center of force and perception.
So we're not just empty vessels waiting to be filled with experiences. There's something more active going on.
Exactly. Each soul is like its own little world, complete and self-sufficient in a way. To illustrate this, Leibniz uses this incredible image of a single soul existing even if the entire universe around it were to disappear.
Whoa, a soul surviving without a universe. That's some serious existential pondering right there. So it's not just that our souls are independent, but they have this incredible inner depth, like it's a universe unto itself.
You've got it. And this is where Leibniz's ideas about perception and reality get really interesting. For him, our experiences aren't just the result of the external world acting upon us. They arise from within, from the rich inner world of the soul itself.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences of that triple chocolate cake, they're not just reactions to the world around me, but expressions of something already present within my soul.
That's a pretty good summary of a very complex idea.
Right.
And it's this concept that really sets the stage for understanding how Leibniz tries to reconcile the existence of individual souls with this idea of a predetermined universe.
Okay, so many big ideas swirling around right now. We've got God, we've got bowling balls, we've got souls that are like self-sufficient universes. My head is officially spinning.
I hear you. And we've only just scratched the surface of Leibniz's thought, but I think this is a good place to pause, let these ideas marinate for a bit.
Agreed. We've given our listeners a lot to chew on. But don't worry, deep divers, this is just the beginning. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper into the curious and mind-bending world of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. All right, deep divers, welcome back. We're picking up our exploration of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, that philosophical heavyweight who loved his bouncing bodies and predetermined harmonies.
Yeah, last time we left off with this image of the soul as its own self-contained universe. Remember that.
Oh yeah, definitely still trying to wrap my head around that one. But it makes you think, right? Like, if our souls are these infinite spaces, how do they all fit together in this grand scheme of things?
Exactly. And that takes us right back to this idea of predetermined harmony that we were wrestling with earlier. How do we reconcile those seemingly separate ideas, right? Individual souls, infinite universes, but also everything already decided.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve a cosmic jigsaw puzzle, and we're not even sure we have all the pieces.
Well, maybe thinking about it like a jigsaw puzzle isn't quite the right metaphor. See, for Leibniz, it's not so much about separate pieces fitting together as it is about this underlying unity that connects everything.
Okay, so more like a tapestry, maybe. All these different threads woven together into one big, beautiful design.
Now you're getting it. And here's the kicker. The master weaver, the one who designed the tapestry and chose every single thread. That's God.
Right, God, the ultimate artist. We talked
Yeah.
about that earlier.
Yeah.
He wouldn't just create something, well, basic, right? It had to be the best, most intricate, most amazing tapestry imaginable.
Exactly. And just like a skilled weaver plans out every detail of their work, God, in his infinite wisdom, has orchestrated this harmonious relationship between all the individual souls and the grand scheme of the universe.
So God's not some distant clockmaker who set the universe in motion and then stepped back, right? He's intimately involved, like down to the tiniest detail.
You got it. And that divine orchestration, that's what Leibniz means by predetermined harmony.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how it all connects. But I have to ask, if God already knows how everything's going to play out, what's the point of, anything? Do we really have free will, or are we all just actors following a script that's already been written?
Ah, the age-old question of free will. Leibniz would say that our human understanding of free will, it's just that, a human understanding. We experience time in a linear way, past, present, future. But God, he's outside time altogether. He sees it all at once.
So it's like we're flipping through a photo album, looking at each picture one by one. But God, he's seeing the whole album laid out in front of him. Past, present, future, it's all happening simultaneously.
Exactly. And just like knowing the ending of a really good movie doesn't ruin the experience of watching it for the first time. Knowing that our lives are part of a larger, divinely orchestrated plan, it doesn't diminish the meaning and significance of our choices.
Okay, that makes sense, but it's still kind of a mind bender. Like I'm still trying to reconcile this idea that everything is predetermined, but I also have the freedom to choose what I want for dinner tonight.
And that's the beauty of Leibniz. He makes you think about these big questions in a whole new way. He challenges us to stretch our understanding of concepts like time, free will, even God.
So how does this whole predetermined harmony thing play out in our everyday lives? Does it change how we should approach the world, how we treat each other?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is both simple and profound. Maybe it means cultivating a deeper sense of compassion, recognizing that even those who act in ways we disagree with are playing their part in this grand cosmic drama. Or maybe it's about appreciating the interconnectedness of all things, seeing the world as this intricate web of relationships rather than a collection of isolated individuals.
That's a beautiful thought. But we haven't even touched on the big one yet, have we? I mean, we've been talking about this perfect God, this beautifully orchestrated universe. But the world is full of, well, let's just call it what it is, evil. How does Leibniz reconcile that with this idea of a loving God?
Ah, yes, the problem of evil. It's the question that keeps philosophers up at night. And Leibniz, he's got some thoughts on that too.
Oh, let's hear him. Because if this is the best of all possible worlds, as Leibniz claims, it sure seems like there's room for improvement.
Right, and that's where I think it's important to understand what Leibniz means by best. He's not saying this world is perfect in the sense that there's no pain, no suffering, no evil. He's saying that this specific world, with all its complexities and imperfections, it ultimately leads to the greatest overall good.
Okay, now you're really going to have to break that down for me.
Yeah.
You're saying that even with all the bad stuff, all the suffering, this is still like the best possible scenario.
That's the gist of it. Think about it like this. God, in his infinite wisdom, he sees the big picture, right? He sees the entire tapestry of existence all at once. And he chooses this specific world with all its inherent possibilities for both good and bad because it ultimately leads to a greater good than any other possible world.
So even horrific events like natural disasters or acts of violence, even those play a necessary role in this best possible world. I'll be honest, that's a really tough pill to swallow.
It's definitely a challenging idea, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Leibniz isn't trying to diminish the very real suffering that people experience, but he is asking us to consider that even in the midst of darkness and pain, there might be a deeper harmony at play, a purpose that we can't fully comprehend with our limited human perspective.
So it's about trusting that there's a bigger plan, even when we can't see it, even when it hurts.
That's one way to think about it. And maybe, just maybe, that trust, that faith in a greater good can help us navigate the inevitable challenges and heartbreaks that life throws our way.
All right, deep divers, we're officially in the deep end of the philosophical pool now. But before we get completely lost in these swirling depths of divine harmony and the problem of evil, I think we need to bring it back to, well, us.
You mean, how do we as individuals make sense of all this?
Exactly. We've talked about how our souls are like these self-sufficient republics, these unique expressions of God's creation. But if everything is already predetermined, where does that leave our free will and our personal responsibility? How do we reconcile those seemingly contradictory ideas?
Ah, now you're asking the really big questions. And unfortunately, we're going to have to save those for our next installment.
Ugh, cliffhanger. But that's okay, because I think we've given our listeners a lot to process already. We've covered God, creation, the nature of reality, even thrown in a few bowling balls for good measure.
And a whole lot of triple chocolate cake.
Well, a deep dive can't survive on philosophy alone, you know. But you're right, we've covered a lot of ground today. But don't worry, deep divers, we'll be back soon to tackle those burning questions about free will, responsibility, and the meaning of it all. So until then, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you in part 3. All right, deep divers, welcome back for the grand finale of our Leibnizian adventure. Last time we left off with a real cliffhanger. If everything is predetermined, what's the point of free will? Do we really have any control over our lives, or are we just, well, along for the ride?
It's the question that has haunted philosophers for centuries, and Leibniz definitely doesn't shy away from it.
So how does he square that circle? Free will in a predetermined universe.
Well, remember that for Leibniz, it all goes back to God. And God, being perfect, doesn't just create a world, he creates the best possible world, right?
Right, we talked about that. But how does that help us understand free will?
Well, imagine for a moment that God is like a cosmic composer and the universe is his grand symphony.
I like where this is going. Okay, so God's the composer, the universe is the symphony. Keep going.
So every note, every instrument, every swell of the music, it's all part of this intricate, predetermined score.
Okay, but what about the musicians? Do they have any say in how the music unfolds?
That's the key question, right? And for Leibniz, the answer is both yes and no. Our choices, our actions, they're like the individual notes played by each musician.
So we're all playing our parts, but within the structure of this grand composition the God has already written.
Exactly. Leibniz believed that our individual natures, those forms we keep talking about, they determine the kinds of choices we're inclined to make. But within those inclinations, we still have a degree of freedom.
So it's like, we can't change the instrument we're playing or the notes on the page, but we can bring our own unique style, our own interpretation to the performance.
Precisely. And that's where free will comes in. It's not about choosing between radically different paths, but about navigating the path that's been laid out for us in a way that reflects our own unique nature.
Okay, I think I'm starting to hear the music here. But if our souls already contain the blueprint for our entire existence, what's the point of learning, of growing, of changing?
Ugh, such a great question. And Leibniz wouldn't say that our souls are static, that we're stuck with a fixed blueprint forever. Remember, he sees the universe and everything in it as this dynamic, ever-unfolding process.
So our souls are more like, what's a good metaphor? Like those time-lapse videos of flowers blooming,
Yeah.
always changing, always becoming something new.
I love that image.
Yeah.
Yes. And learning, for Leibniz, it's not so much about acquiring new information from the outside as it is about unfolding what's already within us.
So it's more like we already have all the answers, it's just a matter of remembering them, like accessing that deep well of knowledge that's already present within our souls.
Exactly. Think about those aha moments, those times when something just clicks and you suddenly understand something in a new and profound way. For Leibniz, those moments aren't about adding something new to our souls, but about bringing something that was already there into sharper focus.
That is seriously mind-blowing. So learning is less about filling a void and more about polishing a mirror so we can see ourselves and the universe more clearly.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the ultimate goal of philosophy, of this whole deep dive, to help us polish those mirrors, to see ourselves and the world around us with more clarity, more compassion, and maybe even a little more wonder.
And on that note, deep divers, it's time for us to surface from this deep dive into the mind of Leibniz. We've covered a lot of ground, tackled some seriously big questions, and hopefully left you with a few new tools for exploring the mysteries of existence.
And who knows, maybe we've even planted a few seeds of philosophical curiosity that will continue to blossom long after this episode is over.
Keep those brains buzzing, deep divers. Until next time, happy exploring.